and has endorsed. We have another one to show you today, but I get a lot of your comments in the comment section saying, oh, you can't work within this corrupt system. Why bother, etc. And John Nichols is going to help us sort out why it is important to both work without the system and still within the system. So I'm looking forward to hearing his comments on that. All that up after the interview about the book. Stay tuned. Hi, everybody. I am going to be joined in a moment by John Nichols from The Nation. He is the author of the aptly and perfectly titled Coronavirus Criminals and Pandemic Profiteers, Accountability for Those Who Caused the Crisis. I have to say, I really could not put it down. He took all the information one might want and put it all together. John, come on in from the backstage of our online green room. Thanks for joining me today.
Well, it's an honor to be with you. And if you find an author who doesn't like an interviewer saying they couldn't put the book down, I'd be interested to meet that person because.
Well, really though, I have put many books down, and this one was a page turner. I really, as I was saying to you a little bit right before we started this interview, everyone that I know was trying to make their way through the pandemic with, is my own child going to school? Is my mother protected? Am I okay? Do I have to wipe off these groceries or not? What kind of mask? Are we allowed to do this? Can we go outside? Can I ride the bus? These questions, especially at the beginning, that it was very difficult to follow all the malfeasance that went on with these elites. And you have taken much of that and put it together in one book that I have to say was, enlightening, but also very entertaining in the way that you wrote it. So I really appreciate that. What made you want to put all this information together in a piece like this?
Well, it started back in, I guess, March, April of 2020 in the very early stages of the pandemic. We had some really jarring things happen in my home state of Wisconsin. Many states delayed voting in the presidential primaries, but the Wisconsin legislature and state Supreme Court refused to allow that. So people who wanted to vote had to essentially risk their lives to go cast ballots. And it seemed to me that even in that very early stage, we saw all of the talk about shared sacrifice and we're all in this together and the country is coming together. I saw that all falling apart. The reality was that wasn't true. The truth of the pandemic, it was quite clear early on, was going to be exactly like so much else that happens in this country throughout its history. And that is that the poor and the working class are told it's shared sacrifice time. You've got to go to work even though you may be risking your life. You've got to maybe see your job shut down or be put at risk as regards keeping your home and things like that, because this is such a jarring reality and it can't be avoided. You just have to deal with it. And then at the same time, of course, the wealthy retreat to their country homes and their waterfront villas and reap the benefits of the moment. And Naomi Klein taught us this when she wrote about disaster capitalism and the shock doctrine. The reality that we must always look in moments of catastrophe at those who are seeking to advance themselves politically or to profit personally as a result. And so I decided very early on that I was going to keep a file. And I was doing all my reporting for The Nation and writing a lot about the presidential race and all these other things. But I would always ask people along the way, about aspects of it. And I'd pull down, different pieces of information. And it was pretty clear that there was a book here, but it was a different kind of book than just the story of the pandemic. That story has been told and will be told. And there are going to be many, many great books on that. What I wanted to write about was a unique aspect of this, and that is the impunity of the powerful, the way in which political and economic elites take advantage of us, even in the most difficult and challenging times. And it was clear after digging into it that there was more than enough material to fill a book. In fact, you could probably do a second edition.
Yeah, I noticed the title, Coronavirus Criminals and Pandemic Profiteers. Talk about the difference between those two.
Sure. I think that there are clear categories that you have to put different players into. And some really are criminal, right? I mean, just what they've done is flat out wrong. And maybe it doesn't reach into the zone of a specific prosecution, but it certainly is a crime. And you put Donald Trump in that category right off the bat. I mean, the guy lied to us. He openly lied about the severity of a pandemic. And then he bragged about lying to Bob Woodward. So, I mean, it's like, well, the evidence is there. It's not very complicated. And so you have someone like that. You have someone like Elaine Chao, the Secretary of Transportation.
Oh, yes. That's exactly who I wanted to talk to you a little bit. Go ahead.
Well, I'd say again and again, bus drivers and subway employees and, flight attendants and others begged Elaine Chao to issue a mask mandate. Very simple, basic step, a mask mandate for all public transportation. It would have saved lives. There's simply no question of that. But she refused to do so and came up with ever more absurd excuses for why she wouldn't do it. And so to me, that falls into the that's just a crime.
It's a crime.
On the other hand, then you have people often who get away with it at a much more frequent level, who made huge profits off this, who benefited from it immensely. And in that category, I would, of course, put the pharmaceutical companies, which are reaping profits at a rate that is almost unimaginable. Pfizer and Moderna and some of their partners are making $1,000 a second, $65,000 a minute, $93 million a day, every day, off these vaccines.
That obscene profit does call into question whether people really feel like they can trust the vaccine. So I have a soft spot kind of in my heart for the fact that these people who don't trust the vaccines, they might have a good reason not to trust them besides being anti-science or whatever.
Well, in this case, I'm double vaccinated and I've got my booster. And if there's another booster to be had, I'm first in line. Right. I'm first in line to get it.
Sure, but you can see how distrust isn't just something to be said, oh, these right wingers are totally crazy. They're anti-vaxxers or nuts. There's a good reason to
distrust pharmaceutical companies.
Exactly.
But I think that doesn't mean, I think this is a real subtlety here. You can be deeply distrustful and skeptical of the pharmaceutical companies and how they operate, and still believe very much in the vaccines and in the importance of getting vaccinated and the value that they play. And this is really
I felt lucky personally because my husband is a scientist, a biologist, and he could explain to me how the vaccines work. I don't understand.
They really do work.
They work, and they're scientifically based, and he could explain to his family who were hesitant, but not everyone has that, which seems a whole nother segment that we could do.
But this gets to the heart of the matter, Julianna, because the pharmaceutical companies, by their extreme profiteering, feed into skepticism, right? They lead people to say, well, they're just in it for the money, right? Now, the truth of the matter is that the pharmaceutical companies are doing the vaccines not because they love doing vaccines, right? They like much higher profit drugs. Vaccines historically have not been particularly high profit. But they were put in a situation by our government where the research was done for them, or immense amounts of the research was done for them. They got advanced contracts that guaranteed them huge amounts of money. So of course they did the vaccines, and they are reaping massive profits. But what you should understand is that the situation we're in is one where it is that sort of crony capitalist combination of government and the corporate sector. Instead of handling it in the public interest, it's done with an idea of, oh, we'll let the market solve this problem, and we'll have the market come in and reward those who deliver the vaccines. Well, that's absurd. The fact of the matter is that we have the capacity to produce vaccines quickly and affordably for everybody in America and people around the world. And that's what should be done. But unfortunately, the way it's been set up is the pharmaceutical companies make massive profits. They literally can't even count the amount of money they're making. They estimate their profits for the year, and it turns out to be dramatically more. And so they're making massive profits, and yet they are refusing to share the data. They're refusing to share the information with other countries and with people who are in need. And so it's the worst of all situations. It shouldn't have been set up this way. It's a mess. And again, I say flat out, get the vaccine. I favor getting vaccinated. I favor getting boosted. But I also favor holding the pharmaceutical companies to account and making sure that we never, ever get ourselves in a situation like this again, where we find ourselves being, reliant on for-profit corporations to deal with a massive public health crisis.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You had Newsweek actually came and took a look, did the piece on you. I thought it was interesting how they put quotes around everything.
Yeah.
Nichols has claimed, they said claimed, you've claimed, as in Nichols has pointed out, that Trump's approach to pandemic, here's the exact quote, was a deliberate quote. They put deliberate dereliction of duty, that it was severely misguided and driven by lies, and that it costs not just a few lives, but hundreds of thousands. It's really very interesting the way they quoted you.
I appreciate the attention, and the attention to this discussion, because it's rare in major media. And I know this is, when I was writing this book, I knew this was a challenge here. If I simply said Trump's a bad guy, right? Well, you could go on plenty of media and do that. But if you say that Trump is a manifestation of a bad system, right? Of a bad structure, and that he was the wrong person in the wrong place at the wrong time, but that he didn't put himself there, that he got there because we have a political system in our country that rewards impunity, right? That allows for narcissistic, self-serving, deeply troubled people to get into positions of power. And then we get hit with a pandemic, and what do? They act as narcissistic, self-serving, deeply troubled people and do horrible things. So we got to ask the deeper questions about, what's wrong with our system. And frankly, the way to get to those deeper questions is by holding people to account.
You answered my question a bit ago, but I'm going to pose it again in case you want to go deeper. You said, again, Trump had a deliberate dereliction of duty. How do we know he wasn't just an idiot?
That's always a great question. Look, that's letting folks off too easily, right? Because if he was just an idiot, right, I can guarantee you Trump would still be president of the United States. That's a painful reality. If Donald Trump had said, boy, I know nothing about this. I don't have a clue about public health, and I don't have a clue about how to deal with a pandemic. And if he had turned to the scientists, who, by the way, were ready to help him. Dr. Fauci was, standing there, said, I'll step up, I'll help. There were a lot of other scientists. In fact, people even disagreed with Fauci on some issues. You could have a really broad set of good information, right? Fundamentally useful information. And you could have sorted through it and dealt with it. And frankly, if Trump had led the country through the pandemic as ably as prime ministers and chancellors in Germany and New Zealand and places around, mostly women, had done, I think there's a very good chance he would have been reelected.
Your book does paint a picture. Well, so there's a silver lining, is what you're telling me. But
but if I could just finish that one core thought, though, that I think that if Trump had just acknowledged that he didn't know stuff, if he had been a fool, that would have been fine. He may have made mistakes, but it would have been ultimately you err toward trying to deal with this thing. No, Donald Trump is a self-absorbed, deep mess of a human being who looked at the pandemic and said, wow, this is going to be a problem for my reelection. And so as he acknowledged to Bob Woodward, he lied about it. He literally lied at a point when people's lives were at stake. And that's not idiocy. That's deep, fundamental self-service and political machinations at a time when we needed someone to work in the public interest.
We put up a quote a moment ago from your piece that was out in The Nation recently that was about the book. And the quote is, let's throw that back up there. There you go. When a president presides over mass death and mass unemployment and remains politically viable enough to claim the nomination of a major party and to mount a re-election bid, even vaguely credible numbers, the rot in the system runs so deep that those who maintain it cannot be rehabilitated. Talk about what you meant when you said this quote.
Yeah, look, I think that this is the heart of the matter. We had a pandemic, and it's ongoing. It continues to be a challenge for us as a country. But we had this incredibly jarring moment in 2020 into early 2021, mass deaths. Trucks pulled up outside hospitals for the bodies. I mean, it was a horrifying moment, and we asked poor and working class people to sacrifice everything, even their lives, as essential workers. I mean, we've been through so much, and yet now, as there is some talk about normalcy, right? Kind of how we might move back to a more functional place. There's the danger that we forget about who did wrong, who screwed up. That's why I wrote the book. And the reason to do it isn't just to punish these people. It's not to say, oh, you did something bad, so we're going to put you in jail or fine you or tax you or impeach you or do something. No, the point is to say that we look for accountability because accountability drives change. If we allow a Donald Trump or an Elaine Chao or a Ron Johnson or an Andrew Cuomo to be rehabilitated, to come back and say, well, we went through that thing and maybe I made some mistakes, but I'm ready to serve again, then we guarantee that we will have the same circumstance again. There will be another pandemic. And whether it's a Donald Trump in that position or someone else who is just as pathological as he, will end up in the same situation. So breaking the cycle is the key. And you can't rehabilitate those who led us into this crisis. Similarly, you can't fail to address the systemic problems that allow such people to get power, both in our politics and in our economy.
Do we have mechanisms to actually hold these people accountable, working mechanisms?
Yeah, one of them is called elections.
But I said working, John.
Yeah, I know. I realized I heard every word you said, and I completely respect the cynicism and the frustration about it. But we actually should be conscious that we had an accountability moment in November of 2020. Donald Trump was voted out of office, and I will argue as on the highest mountaintop that the key reason he was voted out was because of his absolute mishandling and deliberate dereliction of duty as regards COVID. So I think there was an accountability moment there. I think you also had an accountability moment in Georgia, which gave control of the U.S. Senate to the Democrats in 2020. So that can happen. And I think we shouldn't underestimate it. But it can't be the end of it. There should be a whole host of accountability actions. There should be investigations by the Congress, House and Senate at the highest level. There's a House committee that's looking into this right now, and they've done some good work. I give them credit. But do you know anything about it? No. We know everything about January 6th, as we should, because January 6th was a huge deal. We know a lot about, a whole bunch of other things. But the inquiries into who did wrong and who screwed up around the pandemic, that has not been raised to the level it should be. So I recommend doing what happened during the Great Depression, which was that they established something called the Pecora Commission. It was a Senate-driven commission with a former mob prosecutor, a guy who literally prosecuted mobsters going after bankers. And
that seems fitting.
Yeah, I'm ready to put Zephyr Teach out, in front of a Senate committee and have her go after the pandemic profiteers.
That would be fun to watch.
And the monopolists. So that's what I'm talking about. You need that level of accountability, but also there's a simpler level of accountability. We have not been able to pass Build Back Better, which is a modest bill, right? And one of the things that our Republican friends and some Democrats, including Joe Manchin, tell us is that we can't afford it. It'll run us into deficits. It'll cost too much. And I think, well, I know where we can find a whole bunch of money. Let's tax every billionaire back to where they were on March 20th, 2020, when the pandemic hit. Let's say you were super rich. We're not even going to take away all your money. We're not going to do, Bernie Sanders said that billionaires shouldn't exist. We're not even going to go to that radical point. We're going to go to a simple, modest point where we take you back to where you were 2 years ago.
And then what are we going to do with all that?
Well, the trillions of dollars that we would get, because it is in the trillions, by the way. Well, yes. I've got a good suggestion for you.
Do it.
If we were to get $2 trillion, a couple $2 trillion out of the billionaires, and maybe let's say we might even go after some uber millionaires. Let's say we go after people who make over 100 million a year. Not that they have that in their actual holdings, but that they make that much annually. So we go after some of the big billionaires, the big millionaires. You're talking about raising enough money in the trillions of dollars that you can pay for all of Build Back Better, right?
No, these are good ideas, but the mechanisms. Feel.
Oh, I'll tell you what the mechanism is.
Yeah.
Run for office on that instead of the BS that people run for office on. There are Democratic consultants right now who will say, oh, well, we should talk a little bit about this and a little bit about that. And, people are feeling uncomfortable. Push it aside. You run for office saying, if I get in the U.S. Senate, if I get in the U.S. House, I will seek to tax the billionaires back to where they were on March 20th, because an essential worker shouldn't have had to die while a billionaire got dramatically richer. And I will also, what I'll do? I won't do it, but somebody else should. Let's say, let's pause and think about this. There's so much to talk about. It's an endless gold mine from a political messaging standpoint. It's like we had a situation where nurses were literally putting garbage bags on them to protect them against the virus in the early stages. And Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk were thinking, I'm making so much money, I think I'm going to fly into space, right? Juxtapose these realities.
Yeah.
And the fact of the matter is, I think we can change our politics. I don't have any doubt.
All right,
we can change our politics.
We're going to talk about that in our second segment. So I'm glad you brought that up, because you've teased what the second segment is going to be about. But it's interesting. We talked about the dereliction of duty. Not to come back to that point. It's very clear about Trump's dereliction of duty, but it does seem like there was a coordinated dereliction of duty that was just waiting for something like this to happen, where these people could all take advantage of their pet projects, like
absolutely
a privatization of schools. Like, none of these people that you have in your book, let me name some of the names up here, they didn't do anything to help, and they pushed their libertarian leaning ideas forward. You've got one of the chapters, how Betsy DeVos tried to leverage a pandemic to privatize public education. The next one, these are two of my favorites, Elaine Chao, let them die. She was the head of transportation, and she just was like, I'm not going to do anything. Mitch McConnell's fatal bargain, how Rand Paul got COVID-19 wrong, and wrong again. And he keeps going wrong. All of these different people, they were coordinatedly in lockstep of dereliction of duty.
Yeah, I think that's a phrase that I wouldn't mind borrowing. Lockstep dereliction of duty is pretty good.
The next book.
But thank you. But no, look, this is the reality, and again, it's what we see with impunity, right? Impunity is the concept that you don't think you're ever going to be held to account, and if there's a lack of accountability for a long period of time, then those who are in power, instead of opting to do what is beneficial for the great mass of people, because they know that if they don't, they could be held to account for it. They could be punished for it. They will say, "Oh, hey, it's an opportunity, right? This is a chance to do what I might not be able to do in another situation." And so with Betsy DeVos, you see, it happened, in all this is, by the way, not behind closed doors. It's in public. Betsy DeVos went on Tucker Carlson's show and said, well, these schools, they keep doing mask mandates and they're not sure they want to open yet because teachers might get sick and die. Well, if they're not going to do it, maybe we should just move the money over to the private schools that will open, right? So here she connected the two things directly. She literally said, we're going to use the threat of taking public money away from public schools and giving it to private schools in order to force the public schools to do what we want them to do. And that was classic.
And in those, in both that case and the case with Elaine Chao, who was, of course, the Secretary of Transportation, right? They both got enormous pushback by unions. It seems that the role of unions was more important when these things were going on in 2020 than they've ever been before. Can you comment on that a little bit? And also, have we missed the moment, or are we still hot for, is labor still hot right now?
I think labor's still hot. In fact, we've had some real wins for unions in this moment of not enough people to fill jobs. People who are in jobs have a lot more leverage, and they've often been turning to unions to try and advance them. But if there's a hero in my book, or heroes in my book, it tends to be trade unionists and the unions themselves, because in situations where you had strong unions, they were able to push back against corporations and say, hey, hold it, we need to be protected. We need care here. Where there weren't unions, that's where you saw some of the worst things happen. And early on, when I was writing about the pandemic, and I covered it on a very regular basis throughout, I did a lot of interviews with the transportation unions because they were deeply concerned about what was happening to bus drivers, subway workers, and others. They were dying. And their pushback actually was very, very effective. They got protective shields in buses. They got masks, and when vaccinations came, they got them in the front of the line. They did a lot of good work there. But what they recognized was that their work was made much more difficult by someone like an Elaine Chao, because when the unions, and they all came together and asked her to do a mask mandate nationally, she refused. She refused again and again and again and again. And the same thing happened with Betsy DeVos. The teachers unions were saying, look, we've got ideas for how we can get the schools reopened, how we can get kids back into schools that'll be safe for teachers and safe for students. And instead of working with them and respecting them, DeVos and her echo chamber, you were often deeply critical of the unions. And so what I would argue is that if there's a lesson from the pandemic, it is that, sadly, until we make a lot of changes, we can't count on government to always do the right thing. And we cannot count on the corporations to do the right thing. And so you need very strong unions. And it's notable that in the chapter on Jeff Bezos, I write a lot about the effort to unionize Amazon, and making the point that that was covered in a lot of our media as just a typical union battle, right? Union wants to organize, company doesn't want it. But it was underpinned by COVID. And there were a lot of people who stepped up to try and organize the union, and who are continuing to do so, not just at Amazon, but in workplaces across this country, because they said, look, we saw the reality that if we don't have a strong union, we're not going to be protected.
Well, you have said, as we come to the close of this segment, but not the whole show, because you're staying with me for a brief moment after, you have said that accountability is so important, because without it, we will continue to allow impunity. Do you think if, as a nation, we had held George W. Bush accountable for war crimes, we would have been in this same situation we are today?
No, I think we'd be in a better situation if we had. And I do argue that in the essay that was published in The Nation, and that is based on the closing chapter of the book. Look, we have had, with presidents of the United States, repeated opportunities to hold them to account, and we passed on it. Nixon was not held to account for Watergate. He got on a plane and flew off to San Clemente. Reagan was not held to account for Iran-Contra. And Bush was not held to account for the lies that led to the war in Iraq. So we see in different areas, right? Political corruption, international scheming, a war, no accountability. And we see that similar things in the private sector as well. Again and again and again, a lack of accountability. And then we're shocked when those who come into positions of power are self-serving and do not begin to have respect for the public interest, the public good. The bottom line is a failure of accountability over time adds up to impunity. It virtually guarantees that those who are in power will not do what they should do. That doesn't always happen. You can get a good person in power. It can happen. It does. But the danger is so great that the demand for accountability has to come forward. And I can tell you this, that one of the reasons that Franklin Roosevelt was so successful as a president during the Great Depression and going into World War II was because he never, ever limited accountability. They held bankers to account. They held war profiteers to account. And they taxed corporations. They taxed excess profits. They taxed the wealthy. We talk about in this country, we used to have a 91% tax rate, right? That extended out of World War II and into the 1950s. In the boom era of the 1950s, when so much of America's expansion occurred, right? We had a 91% tax rate for the marginal tax rate for the upper income folks. The fact of the matter is that when you hold people to account politically, through impeachment and through censure and other political actions, but also economically through a tax system that really does say, no, you don't get to have excess profits. You don't get to have excess wealth. If you do, we're going to tax it and put it back into the system to serve the great mass of people. If you say that, you're going to get dramatically different and better behaviors on the part of your political leaders and your economic leaders. That's the point of the book.
John Nichols, the book is Coronavirus Criminals and Pandemic Profiteers, Accountability for Those Who Caused the Crisis. I do want to thank you personally for putting this work together. Again, it did draw, it just answered a lot of questions that got missed as one tried to survive the pandemic themselves. Thank you so much for being on the program.
It's a total honor to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Sure thing. You're watching actTV. John's going to stay with us as we move into the Candidate Endorsee Summit segment, where we're bringing you some kick-ass progressive candidates. And we're also going to answer the question, why should we work within the system? This is your question, viewers. Why should we work within the system since it's corrupt? Stay tuned. Hi, everybody. You're watching actTV. Julianna Forlano here. We're going to present to you another kick-ass progressive, as we have been doing. We've been talking about progressives that Marianne Williamson's Endorsee Summit have endorsed, meaning they are super progressives and they are running. Now, we've been doing this for a couple of weeks, and I've noticed some comments from some folks out there saying, why should we even work within the system? Because the system is corrupt. What is the point of running a progressive candidate when it's in these districts, when it's such a long shot that they're going to win? And questions that suggest that we're all completely dejected, which we rightfully might be. But here to answer that question, instead of me answering it, which I feel like I've done 100 times, author, writer, leader, activist, whose new book we just spoke about in the preceding segment, John Nichols, is here to join us from The Nation. Hi, John.
Hey, it's good to be with you.
It's great to see you again after 3 seconds. Well, these clips go on YouTube, so sometimes they'll be standing alone. So can you respond to folks who maybe are feeling rightfully dejected and don't really want to meet another progressive candidate unless they're already Bernie Sanders or unless they're already AOC? We have a lot of people trying to push out either establishment Democrats or Republicans in Senate districts, state house districts, etc. And there's been quite a bit of pushback about why should we work within a corrupt system.
Well, you work within a corrupt system because maybe that's the way you get the leverage to end the corruption, right? You work outside and inside. And I've always been an advocate for an inside-outside strategy. It is totally appropriate to work within the system because, like, if you're trying to, like open up something that's tightly packed, right? You may have to, get in there and leverage it a little bit, and then you pop it open, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, you go in the system not to maintain the system, not to keep it working as it is, but to pop it open, to create that opportunity where you can actually make change. And it is sometimes valuable to work outside the two-party system. Bernie Sanders did that. He came up as an independent. He has always been elected as such. It is sometimes valuable to work within the system. AOC did that. She challenged a Democratic incumbent in a primary. She won and did it that way. And to me, that's the answer on all of this, is you're seeking the change, and you will do it by whatever method may work. And I've never been so respectful of the Democratic and Republican parties as some people who say don't work within the system. I know that some people think, oh, they're all powerful and stuff like this. I actually think that they're pretty pathetic, pretty tragic institutions that you can actually upend, sometimes very quickly and sometimes over a long period of time, but it's worth doing. And in the new book, I talk a lot about systemic problems, and when you're talking about coronavirus criminals and pandemic profiteers, these are different players. Many of the criminals operating in the political sector, many of the profiteers in the economic sector, but you could flip them around, right? The game gets played in all sorts of different ways. And what I argue is that we need systemic change. And you cannot get to systemic change unless you've got some control over that system. Now, maybe there's a general strike and you're doing it from outside, right? But that's hard to organize and doesn't always happen. Maybe it's inside by electing a new class of people, and sometimes that can work. The bottom line is you don't have to be at odds with one another. I always remember that AOC classically on one of the nights of a State of the Union address, instead of being at the Capitol, I hope I've got this right, she was with striking workers in Hunts Point in New York. And she's saying, this is where I need to be on this day. I hope I've got the scenario right there. And the bottom line is that you can be an inside and outside player. So that's my answer. And the critical thing is that we need it now more than ever, because the truth of the matter is that the system is so corrupt. It is so dysfunctional. It is so wrong-headed that we got hit by a pandemic, and instead of a pure, decent, humane public health response, we literally had politicians who lied to us, who blocked appropriate responses. And at the same time, we had billionaires who enriched themselves, corporations that ran excess profits. That's a lousy system. John, and that's a system that needs to change.
Several questions have come up while I've been hearing your response. One is many people think that all of the players that you've mentioned, whether it's be Bernie Sanders or AOC, are all considered within the system, whereas the outside of the system would be, sometimes people even consider labor within the system, but the outside of the system would be something like the Sunrise Movement, and then they get invited into the system, and then there's a whole conversation about whether that's good or not good, etc. And I'm going to two-part you and then let you go. Let so that you can answer. And other people believe that once AOC and some of the other squad folk got in, then they've sold out here and there. I see that all over. This idea that they didn't force the vote, and so they're sellouts, and so now we just hate our own and cannibalize our own people. And these aren't people on the right. These were people with expectations on the left that you would be, I guess, a perfect candidate. And I don't know your thoughts on those two places.
Look, I do think it's really challenging. It is incredibly challenging to step up and seek public office and to get into a position of power and then to figure out how to strike that balance, when to work within the system because you think you can actually achieve something, and when to upend the system and say, this is a failure, this is wrong what we're doing. And I really do understand that from the outside that can look like, oh, you sold out, you're frustrating, you didn't do what I want you to do. But to me, the greatest leaders have always been those who've been able to strike that balance effectively, where they see an opportunity to get something, they do it. When the opportunities are blocked, then they upend the system. And we saw a really classic example of it during the course of the pandemic, or this ongoing course of the pandemic, with the eviction assistance. And Cori Bush, the representative from St. Louis, Missouri, worked very, very hard in Congress to try and preserve protections for people who are in a situation where they might get evicted, right? To make sure that there's federal moratorium on evictions. And she didn't succeed, right? It didn't happen on the floor of Congress. And so what she did when it came time for the recess was, instead of going home and saying, well, we didn't succeed, we failed, that's that, she went out on the steps of the Capitol and slept on those steps with other activists, not with members of Congress, but with activists, to highlight this issue. She used her platform, her prominence, to get attention to it. What happened? The Biden administration actually moved and extended the eviction moratorium, at least for a time. Courts have been a mess on that. Similarly, recently, Jamal Bowman was out on the steps of the Capitol with protesters, risking arrest because what was happening in the Capitol was insufficient. And that's what I would always ask for. I would ask for leaders who are willing to try to use every opportunity within the system to make it work. But if it doesn't work, then to step out of it and to push it and to challenge it using the prominence that they've gotten from their elected position. And that's rare, to be honest. And that's, I think, why you see this sort of rising dissident grouping within the Democratic Party and outside of it, challenging a lot of incumbents and saying, you don't do this. You're not willing to go outside if the process isn't working. And so I think that's where I respect the people that are doing the experiment, that are trying. And I know they'll make mistakes. And I know you aren't going to see perfection at every turn. But as somebody who really wants to see radical change, I don't want to foreclose any option for achieving that change.
I feel the same way. That's how I feel. John Nichols, author of the new book, Coronavirus Criminals and Pandemic Profiteers, Accountability for Those Who Caused the Crisis. I'm about to showcase a woman who is running for Texas 20, District 20 in the U.S. Congress, Jessica Mason. She grew up in poverty in South Dallas. When she was 7, her mother could not afford $20 for medication to treat her asthma. It resulted in her having a collapsed lung. She vows and says that, Washington will not change her. She was in the Navy. She enlisted and then was able to put herself through college. She served as a medic for 5 years, and she really wants to fight, on her platform is fighting corporate money and the way it influences politics. She is one of the, unbossed types, and I'm not sure she is awesome. And I'm not sure if, her chances are all that great in that district. And we are showcasing a number of people who are in that position, long shotters. Can you talk to people about why it's important that even if it's a long shot, these folks continue to run for these seats?
Well, yeah, I'm not here to endorse or disendorse or whatever any individuals. I'll let you do that. But what I will tell you is that that as somebody who's covered a lot of politics over the years, I've covered a lot of long shots who ended up as winners. And the classic example I always use is Bernie Sanders himself. Bernie Sanders ran 4 statewide races in Vermont before he won an election. He lost 4 times. And the interesting thing about that was that each time he went into those races, he got a little more attention, he got a little more support, a little more sympathy. And ultimately, he got to a point where he stepped out of running for statewide office, but ran for mayor of Burlington and got elected by 10 votes. And so the thing to understand is that people who run as long shots often become our leaders, and they often end up with a thicker shell, like a tougher persona, because they have run and lost. They know what it's like, or they've had to take on power. AOC ran and won her first time. That was amazing. But the bottom line is that people who are willing to take that chance and who keep at it, I think often become some of our most important political figures. And one of the fascinating things about Bernie Sanders is that he got elected as mayor of Burlington, and then he ran for governor of Vermont and lost. He ran for Congress first time and lost. He was willing to run and lose because he believed in the ideas more than in his own political advancement. And ultimately that paid off, right? Ultimately that got him to a point where we now are talking about him as a relatively iconic figure. And I think that's the lesson of it. If we dismiss long shots, if we dismiss people who have uphill races, then we're ultimately dismissing the next Bernie Sanders or the next AOC or the next Jesse Jackson, or you run up the list of people who don't always win, but who take that chance. And some of them do win, and they almost always are the ones who are more courageous, more bold, and I would argue more effective.
John Nichols, thank you so much. I know you are not endorsing our endorsement person, but we are endorsing this person, Jessica Mason. Let's listen to her in her own words.
My name is Jessica Mason. I am a Navy veteran, and I currently work as an organizer in affordable housing communities across my district. But most importantly, I'm here today because of the generations of strong Black women from South Dallas that came before me. My story begins as a little girl raised in poverty because of the zip code that I lived in. I grew up in a community that was devastated by the crack epidemic, and my community was failed by political design. My mother worked 12 plus hours a day for a millionaire businessman, but she was paid starvation wages and could not afford to keep the lights on in our home. As a child, I had severe asthma attacks at night, and my mother would have to carry me to the fire station down the street just to power on my nebulizer. The medication that I needed to treat my asthma at the time cost $20, but my mother couldn't afford it. And because of that, my lung collapsed at the age of 7. I spent 3 months in the ICU. What does that say about America, the richest country in the world? How can we let Black and brown children continue to suffer and nearly die of treatable diseases because they don't have adequate insurance? In South Dallas, where I'm from, our children are more likely to develop severe asthma because of pollution. Our water pollution is worse than Flint's. Black women are dying during childbirth, and we have some of the lowest life expectancies in the state of Texas. Our healthcare system places profits over people, and it's not working for us anymore. We need Medicare for all, and that's the end of the story. We've had the same representation for 28 years, and her loyalties lie with healthcare corporations and the fossil fuel industries that fund her campaigns. She was recently seen cozying up with Senator John Cornyn in the media, touting a bipartisan corporate welfare bill to weatherize Texas's unregulated power grid. But what Texas needs is a Green New Deal and guaranteed federal jobs, massive investments in green infrastructure, not incentives to continue producing gas and coal-powered energy and further enriching the pockets of these oil executives. And with all due respect, I'm not okay with bipartisanship when that means compromising on the rights of Black, brown, and immigrant people. So we really need to stop with the bipartisan propaganda and really advocate for the people of Texas 30. Our representative also failed to support Cori Bush's amendment on voting rights for incarcerated people, and she refuses to apologize for voting for the 1994 crime bill that has led zip codes in my district to have the highest incarceration rate in the state of Texas. How many Black men are in jail because of a joint? How many Black men are in jail because they are victims of poverty? How many Black men are killed because of irresponsible and racist policy? We need to end the privatized prison system and stop the criminalization of poverty and Blackness. I am running because I'm angry. The system has failed marginalized communities and working class people across this nation and in my community. And I can speak for hours on the injustice happening in my community. Texas leads the nation in transgender murders. Why do we still have an LGBTQ panic defense? We have Americans who are wary of getting vaccinated because they're undocumented and don't trust the system. We have working people who cannot afford food or rent. In Dallas, we have 19 affordable housing units for every 100 people in need. Black and brown women have been evicted from their homes at unprecedented rates. Majority of the people in my district live below the poverty line. And we have generations of Black and brown people who built this damn country and who have been incapable of accumulating wealth in it. We need reparations. We need unions in every single workplace. We need comprehensive immigration reform. We need representatives to stop making excuses and hiding behind procedures. This race is really a matter of life or death for the people that I love. And we must call out systemic racism and crony capitalism for what it is and be proactive in legislating policies designed to correct these failings. I hope that everyone watching tonight will take time to check out my website at jessicamasonforcongress.com. Follow us on Twitter at JessicaMasonTX and donate whatever you can to topple this system that has failed so many of us. Thank you all, and please join us in this fight against oppression. Again, my name is Jessica Mason, and I'm running for Congress in Texas 30.
Do I have to say anything else? In her own words, Jessica Mason, she is running for U.S. Congress in Texas District 30. I'm Julianna Forlano. You're watching actTV. Our guest today was John Nichols. He's a writer for The Nation, and he is so much more. He has written 1 million books. The latest one, the one we spoke about today, is Coronavirus Criminals and Pandemic Profiteers, Accountability for Those Who Caused the Crisis. We're done. So you don't have to stay with us right now. But I meant to tell you that on Thursday, if all goes well, Chris Hedges is joining us. We're going to be talking about labor and how it's the last hope for the United States experiment with democracy. He's going to be on for the whole show. It's going to be amazing. Get your questions ready and stay tuned into actTV. We have a bunch of other great shows that we do here, right here on this network. Thanks again for watching. I'll see you 2 p.m. Eastern on Thursday.